Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me in the back okay? Wonderful. Thank you so much. I got some affirmatives. Thank you so kindly. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight here at Green Apple Books on the Park. We are broadcasting from San Francisco on Ramatisha Ohlone land. And tonight we are celebrating Sadie Dupuis' collection, Cry Perfume, alongside Lio Min and Amy Berkowitz. Let's give a hand for all of our readers. Thank you so kindly. So I have some very brief business, and then we will get to the fun part, I promise. First, please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us that you might enjoy. Now would be a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. Why be that guy when you need not be that guy? While masks are not required, we do strongly encourage their use in our space, and everyone seems to be masked right now, which is very cool. Thank you so kindly. We're trying to just move forward safer and try and take care of one another, so I really appreciate y'all. And we also want to give our authors the grace to take off their masks while they're on the microphone if they choose, so thank you for being cool about it. We appreciate it. Thank you also for purchasing books by tonight's authors. If you've been here before, you've definitely heard me say, when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you help us put on events such as these, but you support the authors who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. We also have other books if you want to look at those too. You might be interested in them. Thank you so much. So we are going to hear from 3 authors this evening, from a little bit of poetry, a little bit of Leo. I actually don't know what you're going to read, so it's very exciting. So we're going to hear from 3 writers, and then we're going to hear a conversation between Amy and Leo. And I'm going to, Sadie and Leo, and I'm going to introduce, Amy's going to go first, so that's why. And then we're going to have a conversation. We'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end, and I'm going to introduce all of our writers right now, so we'll give a big hand to each of them when I say so. You'll know when. It'll make itself very clear. First, Amy Berkowitz is the author of Tender Points, re-released from Nightboat Books in 2019, and Gravitas, which is coming out in May. Yay! Her writing and conversations have appeared in publications including Bitch, The Believer, Bomb, and Jewish Currents. She lives here in San Francisco, where she's writing a novel that she likes to call Untitled Bisexual Jumpsuits Project. Let's give a hand for Amy Berkowitz. All right, Lio Min has listened to, played, and performed and written about music for most of their life. Their debut novel, Beating Heart Baby, is about boys, bands, and Los Angeles. They've profiled and interviewed acts including Japanese Breakfast, Irina Sayawama, Muna, Caroline Polachek, Christine and the Queens, Ravina, Speedy Ortiz, and Mitski. Let's give a hand for Lio Min. And last but certainly not least, Sadie Dupuis is the guitarist, songwriter, and singer of rock band Speedy Ortiz, as well as the producer and multi-instrumentalist behind pop project Sad 13. Sadie heads the record label Wax 9, edits Poetry Journal, and has written 4 outlets, including Spin, Nylon, and Playboy. She holds an MFA in poetry from UMass Amherst. Mouth Guard is her first book from 2018, and her most recent studio album is Sad 13's Haunted Painting. She is an organizer with the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, and her second book of poetry, Cry Perfume, is out from Black Ocean. It is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give a hand for Sadie Dupuis. Thank you so kindly. Those are our artists joining us this evening, and I'd like to welcome up first Amy Berkowitz.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay, I've never read in a mask before, but I'm glad it's working out for all of us. Thank you so much for having me. The reason that Car cheered when they said coming out in May is that I put 8 exclamation points. So I'm really excited about Gravitas. I'm going to read a few poems from that project. You should know that it's largely about sexual assault and harassment. It doesn't go into any great detail, but just be prepared for those themes. This first poem is called Song, and it starts with a few lines from Today by Frank O'Hara. Oh, kangaroos, sequins, chocolate sodas, you really are beautiful. Pearls, harmonicas, jujubes, aspirins, All the stuff they've always talked about still makes a poem a surprise. Spoken introduction. I didn't realize how little my life mattered until I poured it into my poems, gave those poems to my teachers, and watched them look up from the page, their faces horribly blank, and ask me, Amy, where's the gravitas? They told me my life wasn't worth writing about until I realized they were right. I got tired of trying to prove them wrong, figured they were probably right. Ooh. Pearls, harmonicas, jujubes, aspirins, well, they threw them all away. Casseroles, phone calls, bikes, and Balta, threw them all away. All the things that make a poem a surprise, all the things that make my life, my life, my life. Well, I talked to my professor about my lack of gravitas. I said to her, what can I do to access gravitas? My teacher gazed up thoughtfully at the ceiling. Then she spoke. Well, I suppose it wasn't until I had my first son that I felt I had something really meaningful to write about. Oh my God, I can't lick my finger. Are you telling me to have a son? I asked, stunned and dismayed. She looked embarrassed for a moment. Of course not, she replied. You told me my life wasn't worth writing about until I realized you were right. I got tired of trying to prove you wrong. Figured you were probably right. Chopping wood. The word is so heavy with significance for me that I've never bothered to look it up. So here we go. Gravitas, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is defined as dignity, seriousness, or solemnity of manner. The Collins Dictionary elaborates. If you say that someone has gravitas, you mean that you respect them because they seem serious and intelligent. Your poems lack gravitas. I don't remember which professor said it first, but that criticism followed me from class to class. I don't remember getting helpful feedback. I was prodded to up the gravitas, and sometimes my stylistic choices were called into question. I remember being told that a poem that started every line with "and" was too repetitive. No professor ever asked me, what are your influences? No professor ever asked me, what are you trying to accomplish with these poems? No professor ever explained to me why gravitas was necessary. They only made it clear that my poems were deficient without it. I'd been accepted to the program on the merit of a writing sample influenced by Frank O'Hara. Suffice to say, they knew what they were getting. But once they got me, they didn't know what to do with me. What would they have done with Frank O'Hara? I guess it's different if you're a man. I remember my professors liked a poem by a guy in my cohort about chopping down a tree. He wrote it in an old-timey voice. I wake at dawn and walk the frost-covered path, or something like that. Was it that phony voice that lent his poem gravitas, or was it just that he was a man, and that chopping was more masculine than the verbs in my poems? Painting, shopping, riding, smoking, reading, cooking, asking. Those were some of the things I did in my poems, but I never chopped down a tree. And then a friend reminds me of another poem by another guy about eating a microwaved hamburger on Amtrak. The professors like that one too, she says. Where's the gravitas there, I ask. My friend says, there is none. She says, your poems were all about female friendships and relationships. To say that lacks gravitas is incredibly sexist. It seems obvious now, but when I was 24 and in the middle of it, I didn't understand. I follow my friend's insight to its disturbing conclusion. To say that poems about my life lacked gravitas is to say that my life lacked gravitas. I was writing about my life. The topics of my poems weren't gravely important, but neither was chopping wood or a hamburger. Believing that poetry about the life of a young woman lacks gravitas, believing that the life of a young woman lacks gravitas, enables a certain cognitive dissonance. If the lives of the women in the program aren't taken seriously, then the problem of the serial abuser who's been molesting and harassing them for decades isn't a serious problem. This poem is called He Used to Be Much Worse. By the end of grad school, I was a ball of anger. I'd been there for almost 2 years, and I thought about the serial abuser every day. So I started asking, why is he still teaching here? You have to understand, a professor said. He used to be much worse. When he was young and good-looking, he got away with more. She explained it was a financial problem. The abuser is friends with the woman who funds the program. Without her, the program couldn't exist. As if it would be some grave disaster to dismantle a creative writing program where students are consistently molested. Finally, she said the reason no action could be taken was that no abused student had ever come forward. I found out that was a lie a few weeks later. Loads of women had reported his behavior. Of course they had. They went alone, they went in groups. It never made a difference. He is retired now, by the way. The school never had the guts to take any kind of disciplinary action against him. They quietly changed the name of his fellowship after he was gone. My thesis. Finally, 2 years after recalling my assault, I was starting to write about it. I hadn't shared the poems in workshop. Maybe I felt too vulnerable, or maybe it felt impossible to print out a poem about my rape and carry it up the steps and past the Doric columns and inside the English department building, where the serial abuser continued to abuse my peers and my professors continued to let him do it. How could we workshop a poem about assault when there was a silent agreement that we didn't talk about assault? When there was a silent agreement that assault wasn't happening? Towards the end of a meeting with my second thesis advisor, we all had two advisors. My first was the woman who advised me to have a son. I told him I was finally writing about my rape and finally writing poems about mental illness too. I was thinking I could include some of these newer poems in my thesis, I told him. Could I send them to you? By now we were walking out of the deli where we'd had our meeting. He quickly shook his head and smiled as he held the door open for me. No, he said, I think what you have is enough. This is my last poem. It's very short, and it's called The Size of the Problem. When I tell people who went to other programs about our abuser, more often than not, they say, yeah, we had a guy like that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, don't. Okay, I was about to say.
You're doing great. Up next is Lio Min. Thank you so much, Amy. Lio, welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to read something that is part of a short story that I'm working on right now. If you think this is cool, you could check out my novel too, even though they're not really related. The working title for this is called Instant Crush. And I read part of this before at Charlie Jane Andrews' Writers with Drinks last September. He senses them, those radiant celestial beings, glittering like craft store floors. Girls, 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 waving at their friends who are somehow always at the front of the pit, asking, is there something in my teeth, with a strained voice, lips pulling behind their smiles, blowing a strand of hair out of their eyes while tapping their fingers on the steering wheel, waiting for the train to finish crossing, wiping their forehead with the back of their hand, touching the stove when it's still too hot and yelping, holding their breath under sweeping waves, cupping their hands around their friends' ears to bequeath quotidian or astronomically life-shattering intel, pinching their screens and tilting their wrists to conjure other versions of themselves, or maybe taking their hair down or up, or turning on some light in the background or off to their side, or maybe they're talking, chattering to the listeners who may or may not exist, chanting their prayers as they unroll their lives, their magic, their misery, their potential impossibility, their almost and could have beens and still want tos, on calls and work calls and emergency calls, to friends and lovers and friends who could almost be lovers and lovers who will never be friends, or family or the ones who've earned the mantle, or professionals or priests or magicians or just God themselves, listening to music through headphones on the way to the corner store right after twilight, down streets shivering with music and more music, and laughter and shouting and crying and life. All that life just for girls. He can't lie, he misses it sometimes. He especially misses talking to girls in the bathroom line. The moment when you meet someone who hits you like a tuning fork and the two of you symbolically kiss both sides of an imaginary clasp, forming an interlocking ocarina enchanted to play a single song. You tuck yourselves into the halves of a locket and you talk endlessly, filling the rapidly contracting silence around you because you trust each other here. You want to trust each other, trading easy intimacies in your new clamshell universe. Jean? A shoulder bumping into a nose, sorry turning into a slow unspooling of history. That time an errant heel punctured a hole in the toe of his loafer, and 5 minutes later he knew all of the lyrics to Shy Girl's Heaven. When someone passed him her phone to talk her friend out of giving an ex another chance again. He hadn't wanted to leave girlhood because of those lines, and the girls he'd met there through the extraordinary proximity of chance. But now's not the time to think about them, all those love stories he's abandoned. Jean. The mirror ball of memory stops spinning and suddenly flares, filling the space behind his eyes with filmy fire. He blinks once, slowly, then many times in a fluttering shudder. Lee's phone flashlight hovers above him like an off-kilter halo. Their other hand hangs in the air as though they were about to slap his face, before their palm drops gently to his cheek and caresses it. They're squinting. No, they're winking. No. Lee is scrutinizing him, one very open eye carefully peering into each of his like he's a possible forgery. Take less next time. Lee sighs before taking a seat next to him. The vinyl squeaks against their leather pants. Their braids swing across his field of vision like a curtain made of velvet stanchion ropes as they turn towards someone more chatty. He breathes in their scent, a lone warm sniff of sandalwood buried under an avalanche of freesia, and surveys the rest of the club. And that's when he notices, wedged into a banquette on the other side of their strobe-carved cave, Jaya, who is trying so hard not to look at him that she doesn't notice the stains spreading from where the bottom of her sweating highball glass rests against the ecru silk napkin of her dress. Slicked across the ochre canvas of her upper thigh, the stray strands of its raw frayed hem could be a mistake, a passionate tear or a seam come undone, if he didn't know this dress the way he knows that she cries in her sleep, that her favorite movie is Mississippi Masala and she trained her voice into a scratchier texture to sound more like Nina, that her version of giving up on someone is letting her frustrations and unspoken desires grow into hairline fractures across her cloisonate heart, all the cracks camouflaged by the intricacies of her studied whims and her careful wants and her practiced excuses, until it imploded with a vicious clatter. He remembers the aftermath as two clenched fists beating against the still healing chest, each thud psychically and physically amplified by the knowledge that there had been dampening flesh there just a month before. He starts to raise his hand in greeting, but that's probably not a good idea, and anyway, the motion ripples beyond him, so he closes his eyes, too unsteady. Unreliable protagonist with a punishing appetite, forever stuck chasing the carrot he's hung on a buoyant line from his own back. Didn't he say he was going to stop drinking so much, start turning down the things people passed him at parties, so that in moments like this one, staring down a corporeal ghost, he will have something to say instead of the promise of future static? He wishes he could rewind the tape to 15 minutes ago and remove the stacked paillettes of pressed powder from the lap of his tongue, return them to Lee's friend's boyfriend's dime bag, which in turn returns to one of those bake-like purses, the kind that closes like pursed lips. Is that why they're called pursed lips? Anyway, an effective accessory if there ever was one, but they all are if you really think about it. Accessories, he means. He needs to be outside right now. The machine smoke tastes like if an instant seasoning packet was run through a moldy air purifier, a comparison he can make because he'd done that once. Filled his Marchand dust into his compulsively disgusting freshman year roommate's squat little sputtering tower fan. And he hates that he'll never forget that memory, but from now until the morning, or whenever it is that his body revives him from tonight's mistakes, he will be living on broken rotary time, rigged roulette time. He's not a gambler, but he bets on darkness. I don't know if I have more time or no, so I'm going to stop there. But yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lio. I am very happy to welcome Sadie Dupuis.
I don't know why I immediately took a sip of boba before coming up here and then had to very quickly chew some tapioca. Thank you so much to Lio and Amy for reading today. I'm very happy to get to hang out with both of you and all of you. This book is called Cry Perfume. I wrote it between 2016 and I would say approximately March 15th, 2020. And then spent about the next year editing it because I could not write a new poem in the first bleak year of the pandemic. I wrote this. It was funny. Amy commented to me when we reconnected briefly after the reading. Thank you for laughing. The subject matter is dark. People don't always know they can laugh. And I recorded this audiobook yesterday with my friend Amar, who was like, "Oh, these poems are like funny, and you can tell more so when you're reading them out loud." The subject matter is about having lost friends to overdose. The first time I can remember losing that I knew I'd lost a friend to overdose, I was 15. I'm 34 now, so it's been quite a long time. In 2019, I started sharing info about carrying Narcan. I started working with different harm reduction groups to distro naloxone or test strips or even do on-site drug testing at concerts because I mean, it's true in every industry, but overdose is a preventable death, and we should have as many resources available so that it can be prevented. So that kind of informed not only these poems, but really my understanding of working in the music industry, working in arts, how little harm reduction exists to help and support music workers and arts workers, and how really like everything is just in service of tech. So that's kind of what this book is about. But they are a little bit funny poems, so if you laugh at them, it will refill my MP as I read. And I keep like panicking and thinking I've run out of time, so not getting to poems in the second half. So I'm gonna just start in the middle and see what happens. The middle of my applied in the car post-it flags. The lance goes through. I started crying to songs that made me cry, piling boulders atop my fretful parts. Every night, it's night again. Every morning is a rune. And now there's a stain, and all day I've showed it off for the right people. In raspberry tool, wielding a kitchen knife, dial my phone to finish the riddle. The difference between mania and ringing a bell, only one makes me make bad wishes. And if you guys do the snappy thing, I always like that. You don't have to, but I always like it. Free fall through a black hole. What happens in this movie is the story of my life. There are too many paths to disaster. That's why every inch aches. He lies on top, juicing me down to jetsam. In the family flower shop, but every plant is wilting. In the checkout candy corner, every candy is plain. Showed up for our date in my carnival clothes. The nature of my work is to be crushed beneath a paperweight. Argent morning, trace a line with a board game wand. The sieve of myself I sift through as I see myself out. A door closes, a door closes, a door closes. Put a foot in the frame already. This is called Figure 4. With purpose, I online myself. Oily cheeks and hairs akimbo, so she texted me right away. Miscalculate everyone's name in the wrong state, in new hair, curating treasures in a heap of petticoat lame. So killingly crownable, always doing the right thing first. I'm very, 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 very pretty, says the greeting card. My husband is doing the dishes. My body lies over the sea. I also feel that I can't always, the post-it flags on the left side of the page just disappear for me. I can't explain that, but I found it this time. This poem is called The Great Outdoer. And I seem to keep skipping it because I don't see left side post-it flags. All right. A hologram trims my dead. A robot performs my adjustment. A simulacrum dissolves me while a cyborg doles out the antidote. One screen reads T, and the other screen exercises jowls, waddles. My girlfriend sinks to blue, multi-monitoring, while the wet world moans in lieu of a westernmost window. Immersion panel with HD scratch and sniff sunset. This is called Your Microdose. Fall behind the futuristic, infinitely more scuffed. Into my stein distribute 2 vials of rose potion. 99 wines dropped. A lot of strangers seem happy, not seeping the sun. Even in the sucky circumscription, cute little stomach gamble, Xing out boxes daily for emotional alightness. Shoulder pads, phony movements, stringent copyright chokeholds the clown. All my life, I loved a stuffed bear. It just happened. You just watched it happen in real time. Here's a left side poem that I almost missed. It's called Brain Shank. The book is organized into 5 sections that are named for, I guess maybe we'll talk about this. I don't know what your questions are, Leo. The book's called Cry Perfume, as I've said like 5 times in the past 4 minutes. The section titles are all named for real perfumes, often pretty old ones that have weird backstories, as I learned from the perfume blogosphere. And this section is about, they're roughly about grief, music and sound, tech, intoxicants, and night. So this is from the intoxicant section, but perhaps it could be in any of them. Brain Shank. I hope it's a long nap, imagining comebacks to newsworthy evil that doesn't hit back. Dry nausea from the medical office's carbon fountain, hitting arbitrary deadlines. You arbitrarily refused my earnest request to arbitrarily extend. This is the same building as yesterday. The same place with no bathroom, so I don't drink. It's final boss, after boss, after boss, after boss, until someday you scratch my scalp, pet my ponytail, tuck me in forcibly, hire me to sleep. Weird touch, I spat as she spidered. 2 fingers from my shoulder to my shoulder. Women also do weird touch. But it's friends now, okay? Okay? In the gross scheme of not wanting at all to feel a friend. We're real friends who talk on the phone. Vouch for me, ventricles. All hands on anonymous musculature full of soap. Superficial but safe. Gimme aloneness. When Amar and I were recording this yesterday, I've read this poem a bunch of times, but the word musculature was messing me up. I was like, I feel like there's another syllable in there. And now I think I'm permanently going to laugh when I say it. This is, so one of my favorite little scams. I only do this to major chains and like luxury gyms. I feel like I should clarify, not mom and pop ones. But you can generally get a free pass to any gym if you're like, I just moved here and I'm so interested in joining your gym. So I went to Equinox one time when I was on tour in New York, and I got given a really funny, and I kind of like to get in character, like someone who would, at that time, I think Equinox cost half of what my monthly rent was in Philly. So I'm going to one tomorrow, and I can't wait to pretend that I would ever pay for that. But this was written after going to an Equinox trial some amount of years ago, and the membership person was like, most people who come here wish they could pay more. Okay. It's called Eucalyptus Paycheck. Resources depleted, but you gotta get over the moat. It was better the first time, with a maxed out inner glow. We're out of effigies, so I sport the signature cap of inheritance, bubbling up with my divining ram. The source of my power is my hairy big toe. The source of my sadness is when everyone fishers. I'm from the big city. I only need a pill, and I was born to impersonate. The chlorophyll runs infinite in your private stream. Beyond the pearlescent scantron, I really think you should pay more to keep the stolen spoils yours. At the crest of a parted waterfall, let your heart lead the crushing. Crisp smell of a plant you extincted. I've taught writing at a couple different schools and sometimes get to guest visit. Well, that's redundant phrase. And it's always interesting hearing students explain like why they don't want to broach certain. It can be quite sad hearing students explain why they don't want to touch certain things in their work. So that's, and then thinking about how there are things I don't touch in my own work for similar reasons, even though I'm old now. So that's what this poem came from. It's called Hostage Situation. These are simple demands I need followed. Exceptional rules for the anthropomorphic heart. Stick out my tongue so you read my past lives and witness the generational stick-to-itiveness that dominates my origin story. I can't write romance. I'm too busy full-time filing my way through. I can't write fantasy. I'm too stuck waiting on the new, paying off the last, not just the subway to next week. I can't write memoir. I'm scared the men in my life will see themselves. I can't write politics. I can't write politics. I can't write politics. This one's lost in space. It's called 10 a.m. Canyon. Tomorrow is consoling all the way. Make me feign fawning over another aquatic posture. Go on, snuff the cobwebs off an antique. I live my curiosity like the checkerboard, acquiring au courant trinkets, shelling out over a jar of backyard. From a name on a mailbox, I found the celebrated's anonymity disowned. Namesake for when? Mitzvah. Obituary askance. With the usual creeping, last name, gift registry. These are all in quotes, I should say, like a Google search term. Last name, gift registry. Last name, open casket. Last name, net worth. It's not done, it's not done. Here is your PR. Publish or punish. Pose off the suburban line. Marzipan drapes drawn. Payment for permission to write this poem is, I had to pretend to be nice. I think I'll read one more. Are we good on time for that? Okay. In honor of starting in the middle and only going past that, I'll read the first poem in the book, which is called Fake Blood on a Fake Fur Coat. On a dark ride with my devious nature, what can I manifest? Filling hole after hole. Blue flame for power. Black flame for tender. Days of uncleanliness patterned like a remedy. One gnat for the drinking glass. Dried onion on the stairs. It's the second month of the year and the second hour after midnight. Make your land uncomfortable if you really want to leave. But I really want to wait out the puffy endlessness. Hands in the holes, in the satin pockets. Deep silk of uncharacteristic weather, which never again changes. Only my ego, and it's splattered. All right, thanks. Thank you. Like my favorite. Oh, it's not on.
No, not yet.
I'll tell you my favorite thing when it's on.
There you go.
What's your favorite thing?
So when I do readings, a lot of people have like never touched a microphone in their lives, clearly, and they'll be like, oh, I don't know, and they're, crouching down. I'm like, I can help. I know how to use these. My favorite thing is knowing how to change the height of a microphone, I guess is what I'm saying.
As you say that, I don't know if I can, so that's cool. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on both Cry Perfume and also the new Scream movie coming out.
It's out.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I didn't read any Scream poems tonight, but there are a couple in this book if you wind up buying it.
So I guess like one of the things I do everything on my phone is
also sweating profusely as always happens to me. I'm sick.
Humid. It's warm.
I think I just get scared. I'm reading for too long.
I mean, not like a question per se in the lineage of question. You tour all the time for various things.
Yeah.
And I guess like, is there something that is like a physical difference that you feel when it's like you're performing on like music on a stage versus like something like this? Like, do you actually feel like your body registering these different modes? Something I'm just curious about.
Yeah, I think when I am on tour playing music, and I should say I don't ever play solo because if I'm sweating now, God, it makes me way too anxious. So when I'm playing on tour music with the band, it feels very automatic. It's something I've rehearsed so many times. We changed the set lists, but I have played all the songs so many times, and there's only so many orders when you're doing like a 16 song set. So I feel like I just start playing, and then an hour has passed and I'm done, and then I go sign records or whatever. And I don't know. It feels like this is going to make none of you come to my shows ever again if that's something you would consider. But I feel a little bit more like I'm punching in and out of the clock. Whereas doing readings feels a little bit, I get to spend more time with people, new people. It feels a little bit more like just like hanging out in a general interest group, if that makes sense. You get a little bit more FaceTime. I can see who everybody is. I tend to do kind of random choices for what I'll be doing, so I'm not too comfortable. So yeah, they feel like different things. I feel a little bit more whatever the opposite of autopilot. I'm piloting more at a reading.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess something that like I remember when you rolled through Oakland before when you were touring for Mouth Guard.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I think those of us in the creative arts quote unquote profession are like very attuned to the ways in which like spaces like this one across like performing arts period have become more and more of a subsumed into the maw of tech adjacent experiences, etc. And as someone who is not only plugged into advocating for creative workers in really specific and meaningful ways, which thank you for doing that work, it's also like when you are toggling between these two worlds, it's like, what do you think that the conversations that people working in like the poetry world and like the poetry performance world and then like the conversations that are happening in music, like what is the kind of dialogue happening that you are personally witnessing, if there is one?
I feel like both music and publishing are such big worlds that I can really only speak to the like small press indie label world, but I think there's a lot of mutual concerns among artists working in either of those departments, whether that is fair compensation for the songwriters or writers, whether that is choosing not to collaborate with companies such as Amazon.com, whether that is advocating for better inclusivity on stages in both of those realms. And certainly with like I look at projects like the Freelance Solidarity Project. I look at, my union, which is the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, which was sort of formed in response to a lot of club musicians not being eligible to join the AFM or SAG-AFTRA, the kind of existing and a little bit more old-fashioned musician. No, I take that back. If anyone is watching from any of those unions, all unions, solidarity, and a lot of shared concerns, obviously, but we just weren't eligible to join and organize with them. So I think certainly in these worlds, we kind of all come up I can't speak for everybody in like small press publishing or indie rock, but a lot of us come from DIY and come from like putting together shows or readings with our friends. And if we get to a point where we're doing things outside of that, we still are advocating for similar kinds of changes. So there does seem to be a lot of crossover, but also maybe I just tend to like stay friends with the people who also care about the things I do. So rose-colored glasses sometimes.
There's also a little bit, yeah, like you find your people and you're like, I like everything that's being said here, so I'm only going to find these people.
Yeah. Everybody else, I just go on autopilot and tune them out.
Yeah. So something that you talked about a little bit in your reading was like the fact that all the sections are named after perfume.
Yeah.
And something else that's very present, including in some of the poems that you read tonight, is this use of like hardware language.
Ooh.
And so the way that thank you. So the like as you mentioned, as part of that, like you talk about technology and the way that it both influences your life and also the flow of like art and creative streaming outside of like the streaming sense that we all know and love. But then the world of perfume is also basically any like old school craft and even most new school crafts have like their own technical language. So it's like I see it coming up in your work, and then obviously you are deeply involved in the technology production of things around you. And I was wondering if you'd speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was texting with a friend that I briefly went to school for math. I went to college for math for 2 years before I was like, nope, and dropped out and became a music critic / poet. I really did a good job in securing my future. So I was texting with a friend who continued to do the math engineering thing, who lived here for many years, and he was like, it's great to catch up with friends from that school, because are we all still nerds? I was like, yeah, but I think we might all still be. So I do really love, I do some amount of music production, and I always liken any of my tech interests to playing The Sims as an adult. I get very absorbed. And I think a lot of poets just love to research, and it just provides inspiration for writing. So I certainly do like reading about things that are outside of my realm of understanding and borrowing little bits and pieces. So I think that's part of where some of that language comes from. As far as the perfume thing, I've told this story a little bit, but I didn't have a sense of smell for a really long time. My nose had been broken a couple times. Clumsy, just like Ghostface. So my septum was so severely deviated that I couldn't breathe at all through one nostril and barely could breathe through the other. And I had no sense of smell, or like a little bit, but it'd have to smell really strong for me to get there. And I had surgery in like sometime in the middle of writing this book, and suddenly could smell again, which was exciting. I just have to say I'm a perfume head now, but I feel like that kind of enabled me to at least be interested enough to read some perfume blogs that friends sent me. And perfumes have fascinating, if you get into these blogs, there's really fascinating backstories. There's a lot of like murder, professional rivalry, like death by ingredients. So when I had the book titled and I had the sections, they had kind of like vague one-word titles that alluded to, like the text section I think was called like mirror. Perfume names are just more evocative and colorful, which, I mean, maybe you can guess I like colorful things, both on my person and also in language. So that's kind of why I went into that temporary deep dive on perfumes.
Yeah, it's like the best found poetry on the internet is like the comments of really old YouTube videos.
Even current YouTube videos.
And current, it's true. We can give it up for the current commenting generation. But then the other one that I find super fascinating is like the Fragrantica forums. Like when people get Fragrantica, it's like the online wiki for like perfumes and stuff like that.
I just... My pronunciation is in another department. Grant, I don't know.
No, yours
fragrance.
is right.
But it's like, yeah, like the way that people describe.
Are you a Perfume head?
No,
Okay.
I'm so not. But it's like that ability to like latch onto like a specific phrase or like come up with a turn of phrase that you're like, how did you come up with this?
Yeah.
And now I'm gonna be thinking about this forever. That was just a side quest.
That's good. Good side quest.
But yeah, okay, let me consult my little super professional notes here. So something that like part of the reason that Cry Perfume is what it is, shall we say, is that it was like a kind of like record of you doing your quote unquote like day job, shall we say.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah. And so it ends up being this thing that is in its own way a diary, I would say. And this is the first year of my life that I'm keeping like a somewhat daily journal. And so I want to talk about the way that like keeping a record like that and revisiting it both in the editing process, which does take some time, and then also on the performing process. It's something that you've done before, obviously, with records and with your other book. And I wanted to see if there was anything about this specific genesis and performance that is either new for you or that has made you think about that journey of creation differently.
Yeah, I mean, my first collection of poetry, Mouth Guard, I wrote in an MFA program, which could relate to some of your reading tonight, Amy. I started that program in 2011. I've played in bands since I was 13. No one ever cared about my bands other than my best friends, which was really all like the only people I cared about liking my band. But like 6 months into doing this MFA program, suddenly the band I was in was one that people liked, which was an unusual and new experience for me. And I became very self-conscious of having music in my poems because I didn't want to be, this is like a false paranoid thought, but I was like, people will take me less seriously if I'm the music poet. So I just didn't want to write about music at all, despite it being such a source of friendship, community, you know, a personal creative outlet, my entire social life. So this was like not first book, very little music inflected things. As Lio mentioned, the years I was writing this, 2016 to 2020, I was on tour doing music 10 months of the year. Very much my day job and night job, and why aren't you responding to my email at, you know, on a Saturday at 11 p.m. job? So it would be impossible to keep it out of the book for those reasons, and also because it still is my social life and the thing that brings me joy and like makes me want to keep going. What is the question?
Yeah, so it
I
was
started
kind of,
giving a spiel and
no, we love spiels. But like kind of like the like you.
What was different about
about this particular time on the wheel?
Yeah, so the previous book, written in an MFA program, I was touring a little bit, but not 10 months of the year because I was teaching at a college and taking classes. So I wrote at my desk and I wrote in my like dungeon. We got 5 minutes left of our combo, just so you guys know. You know, my student teacher dungeon in the English department's basement, with like a hole punched into the wall.
Classic.
And I didn't write on tour. You know, 2016 to 2020, I was like, if I want to write any poems ever again, I have to start figuring out a way to do this on tour. So I wrote in a notebook that's like, you know, a similar version of which is in the back room here. When I did bring my computer on tour, which I really try to avoid because it's one other thing to be worried about, and yeah, I could write a little bit from a bench seat in a 15-passenger van, ideally kicking the person out in the seat next to me so no one would read over my shoulder, which makes me unable to write. Sometimes I'm like in the bathroom of a venue, like voice memoing some ideas. Certainly a little bit of notes apping, which I had never done in the past. And then when it came time to edit all this stuff, the first book was in this MFA construct. So I had 1, if not 2 workshops a week to read things aloud and see what people thought and regard it or disregard it, depending on whether I respected them. So, you know, yeah, okay. There was a lot of editing, a lot of feedback along the 3 years that I was writing it. this time, I just wrote things and put them away, put them in a folder, didn't look at them until the pandemic was raging. So it was a totally different editing process where I was editing everything for the first time, knowing what the book was about and what themes I wanted to make sure were highlighted, so I could make cuts or few additions. I tend to draft long and then edit till it's tiny, with the collection in mind, which was not true with the previous book. So that was kind of the big, and also having done some in voice memos or some handwritten. I have atrocious handwriting. It's illegible even to me. So that made for kind of fun transcription where I'm like, I can't really tell what word this is, but I'm going to pick one that looks like it, that feels cool. What am I saying into my voice memo over like a loud metal band? I'll have to kind of transcribe it, in a wonky way that lends to, like, it could be kind of generative to mistranslate yourself. So those were some key differences in the drafting and editing between the two books.
Cool. Do we still have time, or is it time?
Q&A time?
Q&A time. All right. Thanks for talking.
I think you stay. Do you stay up here?
Do
or
I
do you
stay
want to
up?
leave?
Okay.
Yeah, you call on people. Give me some.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we can do that.
And if no one has questions, then we'll keep going. Does any? Yeah.
Curious if there are any poems in here that were particularly therapeutic for you to write or challenging for you to write.
Yeah, there's one in here that I had not been reading much. I did another tour on this book in the fall when it was released. And for those readings, because I hadn't read all of these out loud a million times, we wound up bringing a bingo ball dispenser to sort of randomly pick. I'd call on people and say, just say a number between like 8 and 113 or whatever, however long this book is. That was close. So there's one poem in here called Steal My Sunshine, which is named for the Len song. But I wrote it, I read it a lot at AWP last week because I wrote it in Seattle. In June of 2019, and at the start of that year, I'd lost like 3 friends to overdose in like less than a month, which was a big influence on a lot of the poems in here. And that particular one was written after waking up from a dream, like visitation dream, where you see someone you've lost in your dream and communicate with them. And so I wrote it. I didn't edit it really at all. Because it felt like I should honor the what came out of the dream and the visitation. And it's tough to read it. I feel like I've gotten better. Maybe I'm starting to go into autopilot on it in a way that's like healthy and helpful to me. But yeah, it's definitely tough to revisit some of those things. And I think part of why I like to make the poems a little bit funny is because that's how you process. At least that's how I process trauma and grief, is having humor and having a way to balance emotions and remembering that even when you're thinking of someone you lost, you're also thinking of fun or funny things that you did together, and it feels more honest to incorporate the duality or quadrality of emotions. But that's one that has been a learning curve to figure out how to read, and yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone have a question? Yes.
Yeah.
Do you approach writing songs and writing poems differently? And I think maybe Lio asked you some iteration of that question.
And what, I ignored it? Sorry, Leo.
It's fine.
Let's see. I do write pretty differently for songs and poems. In part because I like to play The Sims, which is to say go on my computer and like program drum beats for a few hours and then program bass, synth bass, a lot of synths. Maybe then I'll add a bunch of guitars, percussion, all these different things before I've gotten to doing the lyrics. So you only have like so many options when you've already filled up a lot of the sonic space, and when you know, oh, here's where the snare drum's gonna hit, so I want a word that hits there with it, or here's I have a sense of the vocal melody, only so many syllables can fit there. It feels a little more akin to doing a puzzle, not in like a reductive way. It's just like a different part of the brain than when I'm writing in like free verse, blank page. Sometimes I give myself rules, but the first book was the MFA book. This one I just did whatever I felt like at all times. So I tend to get more of the sense of rhythm and melody in poems from the editing process because I draft really long. I tend to just say, I have 1 hour to write. I'm going to keep writing for that whole hour, and I won't edit in the moment. I'll go back later and carve into it and figure out what it needs to look and sound like. So I feel like the poems lead me to figuring out what their rhythms and melodies will be, whereas songwriting, I'm finding words that fit an existing rhythm and melody, if that makes sense. Yeah. Anyone else? I'm the teacher now.
Do you have any tricks for a block when you feel blocked?
What?
Do you have any tricks for a block, like when you're feeling writer's block? What you like to do?
Just say, this is my 1 hour that I'm going to work on it, and I have to do something in this hour. And I do this for songwriting too. A lot of Speedy Ortiz songs, even if it's not the final lyrics, if I have not written a song in a while and know that I'd like to, I just throw my phone in the other corner of the room, put the timer on for 1 hour, have the notebook out, have the keyboard or something out. What can I do, and what I have to have something done in 1 hour. Generally, you're like, I did a whole song, it's been half an hour, because you're not looking at your phone, you're not distracted by, Googling things. And I do a similar thing in writing poems where, or I'll say, like, I did a thing recently for Midwinter Day, the Bernadette Mayer book that was written over a single day, winter solstice. A bunch of poet friends, all did that too, where we just cleared the day and wrote all day long, and I wrote for like 8 hours that day. It's, about 14,000 words I wouldn't have had otherwise in a very long poem. So I think making little constraints like that for yourself. I like looking up other poets' constraints or prompts and trying to write to those and just making sure I follow the amount of time I've set for myself and I'm not tweeting in that time.
I'm gonna jump in with one again if there's not another, real quick.
Do you have a question?
From our online audience.
Oh yeah.
Who are your poetic influences and how do they influence your music? And vice versa, who are your musical influences and how do they influence your poetry?
Oh my God, that's a lot of questions. Let's see. Some of my favorite poets a lot of my favorite poets are contemporary poets, and I feel like I am. Someone was saying this is like a media person thing, and I resented it, but maybe it's true. I feel like I'm always really excited about reading new things and listening to new things, and I don't always revisit my oldest favorites. So some of my favorite writers are people I'm reading with on this tour. Morgan Parker is someone I cite a lot. I briefly included a quotation from her in this book and then took out all the quotations because I got scared. So we're reading together this week at some point. Alexander Martinez is a poet whose chapbook I actually helped publish this year. It's a really incredible book called Heartbreaker that is about being her mother's primary caregiver through Alzheimer's and using the lens of Tom Petty lyrics to talk about that. It's amazing, highly recommend. I mean, you'd be ordering it from Bandcamp and I'll ship it to you when I get home, but I recommend doing so. Sarah Rose Etter is someone else I'm reading with this week, novelist who I really love. I like Eve Babbitt's a lot. I know everybody kind of got into Eve Babbitt's, but I feel like she's been a big influence both on my songwriting and poetry. Let's see, other direction. Who are songwriters who influence my poems? There's like a whole big part of this book that was like listening to Santi Gold, who's one of my all-time favorite songwriters, producers, performers. I got to talk to her for a column I was writing about musicians reading books, and it was like, of course you have genius picks because you're a genius. So her music definitely. I used to always like put on Steely Dan when I was driving to a poetry reading. So maybe them in a weird, when I'm being weird and gross. Yeah, I'm always excited by new things. That the earliest poet that was like my favorite was Sylvia Plath. I really enjoyed reading that long biography, Red Comet, I think it's called. That was very fascinating to me as someone whose like earliest poetry when I was a 20-year-old was just aping her completely. What else does the internet have to say? What are they saying? Are they liking it? How many retweets? Nice, thank you guys. Do we have time for Lio to do another question? Okay, unless somebody else.
I mean, yeah, you can step, what is it? Speak Now, Forever Hold Your Peace.
Yeah.
Is that the wedding thing?
Speak Now, Taylor Swift. There's like at least 2 Taylor Swift references in this book. They're not necessarily positive.
No comment. I guess like as you're talking about the process of like performing this stuff and all of that, I was wondering if there are any songs that have become poems or poems that have become songs, either in this cycle or just in general.
Whenever I do get asked this sometimes, and I always feel like the answer is like one time I took one line from a poem I didn't like and put it in like the late added bridge of a song that is on an EP called Real Hair. So I don't do it very much, and it's really because of like what I said earlier. It's hard to like force lines of poetry to fit into music that only has so many. I mean, obviously there's like infinite options, right? But to me, like in my voice, I feel like there's only ever so many options, and it's hard to force them into one another. For me, I feel like I'd have an easier time setting somebody else's poems to music because I don't have the ideas in my mind of like exactly how they need to be read. Yeah. So any poets out there, you want commission a composer to turn them into songs? Hello.
Sick.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Green Apple, Amy Griffith, Lio Min. Buy both of their books, which are for sale here.
Thank you so
Oh
much.
no, we're traveling mask. Oh no. It'll be fine.
Do with it what you wish.
Yeah, the inside's good.
Can I get one more hand for Sadie Dupuis? Thank you all so much for joining us. The weather is not good today, and you all made it out to be here together, and I so appreciate that. Thank you so much to our online audience for joining us. Thank you online from wherever you are tuning in from. We have books from all 3 of our writers available at the front. You can find them there. And if you would like, is it safe to assume that you would sign copies of your books?
Yeah.
If people ask politely, they will do that. And we're going to have Sadie set up at the back desk for a signing line. So if you need to know where to go, I'll gladly tell you. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.